Nearly 4,000 years ago, ancient writers in Mesopotamia pressed their tools into wet clay and wrote down something that still speaks to us today. 8 kings, 5 cities, 241,000 years. The numbers seem impossible. The claim seems even stranger, that kingship came down from heaven. That civilizations rose and fell before a great flood wiped everything clean. And that we, everyone alive today, are simply the heirs of a world rebuilt from ruin. If the Sumerians are to be believed, ours is not the first triad civilization. It may not even be the second. But what did these ancient writers actually record? And why have millions of people become convinced that somewhere under the deserts of Iraq lies proof of societies that disappeared before history even began? The document at the center of this mystery sits in a glass case at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. It is called the Weld-Blundell Prism, an 8-inch clay block with 4 sides, each covered in neat columns of wedge-shaped marks. A wooden stick once went through its center, letting readers spin it like a catalog of kings. It was found in 1922 during digs at Larsa, an ancient city in what is now southern Iraq. British archaeologist Herbert Weld-Blundell pulled it from the dust of a world that had been forgotten for thousands of years. The clay prism held what scholars came to call the Sumerian King List. The document was not one of a kind. Over the following decades, archaeologists found more than 16 other tablets and pieces that carried parts of the same text. They came from Nippur, Susa, Larsa, and sites spread across Mesopotamia. The consistency was striking. Across centuries of copying and recopying, the basic structure stayed the same. A line of cities, the kings who ruled them, and how long they reigned. It read like a record of power, tracing an unbroken line from the very beginning of time. What caught the attention of scholars? Then came the flood. Quotes, "The flood swept over," the writer recorded, "and after the waters pulled back, kingship came down from heaven once more. A new line of rulers began. Their reigns were measured in centuries, then decades, then years. The numbers slowly got closer to what we might call normal." This pattern, impossible lifespans followed by a huge reset, excited alternative historians. Here was an ancient document, they argued, confirming what oral stories from around the world seemed to suggest, that advanced civilizations flourished in the deep past only to be destroyed by disaster. The Sumerians weren't writing myths, they were saving memory. But what did mainstream scholars make of it? In 1939, Danish Assyriologist Thorkild Jacobsen published the first careful study of the Sumerian King List through the University of Chicago. His work changed how researchers approached it, but cracks began to appear. Later scholars noticed that the King List contradicted itself. Dynasties it showed as one after another had actually ruled at the same time, their lands overlapping. Kings it listed as ruling from one city had inscriptions proving they had ruled from another. The document's claim of a single unbroken chain of kingship was a made-up story, a political narrative, not a history. 3 things had hidden this for decades. First, the document's great age earned respect. Scholars did not want to dismiss a text that was 1,000 years older than the Hebrew Bible. Second, the lack of competing records left the King List unchallenged. Most Sumerian records had turned to dust, and what survived was in pieces. Third, the way the list was put together, its set structure and repeated phrasing, made it seem real. It read like official record-keeping because it was designed to look that way. Scholar Piotr Steinkeller offered a different explanation. The Sumerian King List, he argued, was propaganda. It had been created during the Akkadian dynasty to justify Akkad's claim to rule by tracing an unbroken line of power from Kish, the first city to hold kingship after the flood, straight to Akkad itself. Later rulers had picked up and changed the list, adding their own dynasties, adjusting the numbers, adding new cities. The Weld-Blundell Prism, for example, ended with the Isin dynasty, suggesting it had been made by an Isin king who wanted to show himself as the rightful heir of Sumerian tradition. The antediluvian section, Those 8 Impossible Kings, was a later addition. Steinkeller and others noticed that not all versions of the King List contained it. Some began directly with Kish, skipping the flood entirely. The kings before the waters, it seemed, were not ancient memories. They were a political invention. This raised a question. Why would scribes make up a prehistory spanning hundreds of thousands of years? The answer was in the numbers themselves. The Sumerians did not use base 10 like we do. They counted in 60s. Their system gave us the 60-second minute, the 60-minute hour, and the 360-degree circle. Reign lengths in the king list were written in units called shar, nir, and shushi, all multiples of 60. A shar equaled 3,600. A nur equaled 600. A shushi equaled 60. The numbers on the clay tablets were not meant to be read as real years. They were symbolic ways of showing power and the favor of the gods. When scholars converted the antediluvian reign lengths back into the original notation, a pattern appeared. The lengths were not random. They were round numbers, easy to divide by 60. They followed math rules that any Sumerian writer would have recognized. The 8 kings before the flood were not real rulers with impossible lifespans. They were legendary figures given set reigns to show their mythological status. The Sumerian King List did not prove that 6 civilizations had risen and fallen before ours. It proved that the Sumerians understood the power of origin stories by connecting their rulers to a cosmic line. Kingship lowered from heaven, saved through the flood, returned to humanity. They turned politics into destiny. But what about Eridu, the first city named in the list? If the Sumerians considered it the birthplace of kingship, was there anything beneath its sands? In 1946, Iraqi archaeologist Fouad Safar and British archaeologist Seton Lloyd began digging at Tel Abu Sharain, a mound in the desert southwest of the ancient city of Eridu. Locals had known the site for centuries, but no serious dig had ever been attempted. Safar and Lloyd believed the mound was hiding Eridu itself. They were right. Under an unfinished ziggurat built during the 3rd dynasty of Ur, the team uncovered layer after layer of earlier buildings. Temples stacked on temples, each built on top of the ruins of the one before it. In total, they identified 18 separate levels of occupation, some dating back to the Ubaid period, roughly 5,400 BCE. At the lowest level, they found the remains of a small shrine dedicated to Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water. It was one of the oldest religious buildings ever discovered. The dig revealed something remarkable. Eridu had been lived in for nearly 5,000 years. Generation after generation had worshipped at the same place, expanding the temple, raising the platform, turning a mud brick shrine into a towering ziggurat. The Sumerians were not wrong to call Eridu sacred. In terms of archaeology, it was one of the oldest places of continuous worship in all of human history. The team recorded pottery styles changing over thousands of years, painted pots giving way to plain ones, decorations growing simpler as populations grew. Fish bones and net weights confirmed what the myths described. Eridu had been a fishing community before it became a holy city. The tools found in the lowest layers were not advanced. They were basic. Stone tools, reed construction, no metal, no writing. Frightening. What came later developed slowly, through trial and time, but the dig found no evidence of civilizations that came before the known record, no impossible technologies, no advanced societies wiped from existence. The pottery changed little by little from earlier styles. The buildings showed slow improvement, not a sudden appearance. What Eridu showed was not a forgotten past, but a remembered one, a place so ancient that by the time the King List was written, its beginnings had passed into legend. Not everyone accepted the scholarly view. Alternative researchers pointed to the specific words of the King List. A kingship descended from heaven, they noted, was not a phrase the scribes invented. Sumerian mythology described gods walking among humans, teaching them arts and sciences, setting up order before returning to the sky. The Anunnaki, deities who appeared often in Sumerian religion, were said to have created humanity and guided civilization. To read the King List as pure fiction, critics argued was to ignore its cosmic context. Some suggested that the antediluvian kings were not humans at all, but divine rulers, their reign lengths reflecting not calendar years but astronomical cycles, perhaps the wobble of Earth's axis, perhaps the lining up of planets. Others suggested the numbers held genetic information, population counts, or technologies now lost. The theories kept growing. The evidence stayed out of reach. What the scholarly record does show is that the Sumerians, like many ancient peoples, thought about time differently than we do. Their myths described ages of the world that stretched far beyond any written history. Their kings claimed to be descended from gods. Their scribes wrote down reigns and numbers meant to show not how long someone ruled, but how much power and divine favor they had. A king who ruled for 36,000 years was not a man who defeated biology. He was a figure of cosmic importance, his reign blessed by the gods. The Sumerian King List, then, is not a record of lost civilizations. It is a monument to the power of storytelling, a document created not to record the past, but to shape the future. Every dynasty that held power in Mesopotamia added to it, changed it, and claimed its authority. The antediluvian kings were less a memory than a mirror, reflecting back the ambitions of whoever held the writing tool, and yet the questions remain. Beneath the sands of southern Iraq, the ruins of Eridu still wait. Italian, French, and Iraqi teams resumed digging in 2019, producing detailed maps of the Ubaid period cemetery and the structures around it. New technologies, ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, environmental DNA analysis, are revealing patterns that earlier archaeologists could not see. The story of humanity's earliest cities is still being written. The Sumerian King List records that 8 kings ruled before the flood. It names their cities. It counts their years. Scholars have spent a century debating what those numbers mean, but one fact has never been questioned. Nearly 4,000 years ago, someone believed this account mattered enough to carve it into clay. They wanted the kings to be remembered. They wanted the cities to be preserved. They wanted the flood to be recorded. The prism still spins in its glass case. The names still line the columns. Alulim, Alalgar, Enmenlu Anna, Susudra. The flood swept over. Kingship descended again. The question is not whether 6 civilizations existed before ours. The question is why, across thousands of years, humans keep telling stories of worlds that came before, and what we hope to find in them. The Sumerians recorded 8 kings ruling 241,000 years before the flood. Scholars call it myth. But if it is only myth, why did scribes across Mesopotamia copy it for 2,000 years?